felt like starting this video with how do you like him now? How do you like Biden now? But then yesterday, unthinkable words come out of his mouth. Cold-blooded words. I'm still in shock that I actually heard them. Is this just gross negligence, incompetence, intentional? It's virtually impossible to tell now until you know maneuvers made over a month ago that start to give a different reality, a different truth, a different spin on this story. And we'll go to answer that incompetence, intentional, or gross negligence question. And this will call Biden into great question very, very quickly. Or we could go on to the second track, which we're going to be doing later this afternoon over at Restricted Republic. Remember, Donald Trump Jr. called this the largest hostage crisis in U.S. history. Well, there's a lot more to that. Biden's cabinet now. That's the question, right? How's that cabinet performing for you now? Because from what I've seen, they've been MIA. Or instructing you completely wrong, or you're simply just not listening to anybody. Ignorant, intentionally incompetent, no one can tell. But get over to Restricted Republic. You see the catalog flashing on the screen. I'm sure most of that is probably now bleeped out and won't even be shown anyway. But you'll see the entire catalog. It's growing. The membership is growing. And why? Because people want true news. They want facts. They don't want agenda that all the platforms now control. Doesn't matter anymore. It's not if, it's when they're gonna block you. They're not gonna allow something because the truth is just a reality they don't want to face. They never expected this to happen, but it is. Right now, 2 discount codes. Discount code FREEDOM. That's 24 months, $5 a month, 14 days for free, or discount code SAVE10 at annual checkout. $10 off the annual subscription. Again, 14 days for free. Cancel anytime. All subscriptions auto-renew. Look at the comments, and I promise you, you will go nowhere else for your high-level news. Now let's get back to the story. We're going to stop it there because the next thing you saw was the body dropping out of the plane. But then if that wasn't bad enough, to just go ahead and put salt in the wound and have more questions rise up, the last thing you'd want to say is exactly what Joe Biden said here. I still can't believe these cold-blooded words.
In the pictures, we've seen those hundreds of people packed into a C-17. We've seen Afghans falling.
That was 4 days ago, 5 days ago.
That was 4 or 5 days ago? That's the words that come out of your mouth, the most cold-blooded words I've heard. So I guess death has a timestamp? Or are you just used to when you tell the mainstream media to shut down a story, they shut it down. They should never question you. Oh no, Joe's being questioned. This is what would happen in a normal presidency, one that the mainstream media wasn't cheerleaders for. Presidents would be questioned. Presidents would have to take questions. Of course, Joe doesn't. And now he thinks he's in a safe environment. But as I told you days ago, there's something that went wrong with Joe. So now they're maneuvering against him, and he can't hold up to the simplest line of questioning. So he says, well, ignorant things like he did there. That was 4 or 5 days ago. Just forget about that body falling from the sky. It's hard to even imagine what's happening right now. It seems like he tried to channel his inner Trump, though, as he's gone orange man also. Maybe he thought that would get him out of the hot water, but of course it doesn't. But here's what really gets psychotic, cryptic, just grim. Embarrassing timing, to say the least. The Biden State Department moved in June to cancel a program overseeing the protection and evacuation of American citizens stationed overseas in the case of emergencies, just as the Taliban was taking over Afghanistan. Well, now the storyline shifts, doesn't it? It may go from incompetence to ignorance to something much different. You pulled down the ability for us to evacuate in what, again, the largest hostage crisis in American history, as Donald Trump Jr. called it. It goes worse, of course. Biden's State Department abolished Trump-era Crisis Response Bureau just months before the Taliban took it. See, it's everywhere now. People are waking up because you can't just dust this under the rug. This doesn't go away. This is a permanent stain. Remember when I said it got worse? Defense Secretary Austin, here's what he has to say about those people trapped in Afghanistan.
We're going to get everyone that we can possibly evacuate it. And I'll do that as long as we possibly can until the clock runs out or we run out of capability.
Let's unpack that for a second. We'll continue to evacuate Americans until the clock runs out or we run out of capability. So I guess the no man left behind is out the door with this administration. It's just gone. We'll do the best we can until we can't anymore, and then that's all we're going to do. Just throwing out the bathwater here. I am working very hard right now because this is the portion of the video we put on to the main sites, and I am guarding every single word because there is just so much other things you should call this. Abolish your crisis response bureau months before this all happened. Not have an adequate plan in place and just throw caution to the wind and then strand tens of thousands of Americans in Afghanistan. And everything that the mainstream media has been trying to propagate about the Taliban's going to turn over a new leaf. We'll get there in a minute. Just got to digress. The Washington Free Beacon. The Biden State Department moved to dissolve the Trump-era crisis response program according to an internal State Department memo and sources familiar with the matter. That memo, which was marked sensitive but unclassified and was signed by Deputy Secretary Brian McKeon, approved the discontinuation of the establishment and termination of the Contingency and Crisis Response Bureau, a new State Department entity created during the Trump administration to coordinate emergency response services. That is exactly the one you wanted to get rid of at this time. Because there's people stranded there. They're calling every attorney they can find. They're calling every immigration expert they can find. And here's what we get. I went to the airport. One client texts Goldstein. Afghan troops wouldn't let us in. U.S. soldiers came storming out of the airport saying people were shot dead and they won't let them get on a plane. People of all nationalities, European citizens also. People are trampled onto others and so afraid the Taliban are ruthless and brutal. When the embassy says awaiting immigrant visas, does that pertain to an applicant who has done his or her interview, or does that include people who have not been scheduled for an interview? And what does the expert say to them? Stop asking questions about immigration law niceties and get basically the heck out of Afghanistan and get out now. That's what he says. But back home, as I said, people are waking up. These billboards are popping up across the United States now. The Taliban, of course, mocking him. I'm sure many of you saw this photo, but more billboards go up because where's Joe? Well, Joe tried to come out. He tried to give some interviews, and he failed miserably. Failed miserably. Let's go to Sean Hannity for a moment.
Well, I'm surprised he didn't do the press conference from an ice cream shop, Sean, because that's all he's been capable of doing. But it's an absolute embarrassment. The reality is this: as far as I am aware, Joe Biden has created the largest hostage situation, perhaps in the history of the world.
Just some of the very strong statements being made, but it's an easier question. What's the plan? What's the plan? I haven't seen the plan. Have you seen the plan? I've heard mainstream media. I've watched mainstream media. What's their plan? Their plan is to defend the Taliban. They have reclaimed to be committed to the peace process and inclusive government and willing to maintain some rights for women, some rights. My question would be, under their law, what rights do women have? Reason I'm silent right now. A spokesman said women should be allowed to continue their education, and diplomats, journalists, and nonprofits could continue operating in the country, but many observers worry that a return to Taliban rule is a return to Afghanistan of 2 decades ago when women's rights were severely restricted. Oh, well, wow, you said some truth there. Of course, nothing was going to happen. Everything was going to be peaceful. Sad to hear Taliban terrorists executed 4 Afghanistan Army police commanders in Cricket Stadium in Kandahar. A former police chief here, many considered a hero of that area. And they're doing this, of course, with U.S. military equipment, which Biden administration has admitted to leaving behind. Oh, it's not only, no, V's. You can watch this clip as it's rolling in the background of all the munitions and arms that were left behind. Silence the volume there. This goes on for several minutes of everything that was left behind to now arm the Taliban. Just gross negligence, gross irresponsibility. And if this doesn't result in a trial, if this was Trump, there'd already be a trial going on. They've already had, somehow they would have come up with 14,000 page document. It would have came out of the closet somewhere immediately and Trump be on trial right now, but nothing else is happening. But I'm going to leave you before I go off the rails. And you got to answer this question in the comments, please. What's your thought? Incompetence, illegal, ignorance. What is all this besides a disaster? So much so that a state that Biden devastated Trump, well, now one of the seats have flipped Republican. You see, you can't hide what he's doing here. You just simply can't get rid of it. It is that stain that will hopefully turn the entire midterm elections, except there's some other elements to that we're going to cover in the second half because you can't cover it here. And then there's some elements to the pandemic, which we love to cover, but we can't cover here. And then there's some things about, well, his cabinet that we'd love to cover, but wait, that's right. We can't cover that here either. You wonder why, when things were destined to fall apart in the way they were, that maybe so much of this control was seized up front because they simply didn't want anybody saying or reporting on exactly what was going to happen. Because this was destined for disaster a long time ago. And now you're watching it play out in real time. So do me a huge favor. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you put your comments. Make sure you're here tomorrow. Make sure you get over to Restricted Republic. Take advantage of all the discount codes we have out there. And come here when we go off the rails and could just talk like normal folks and actually have a real discussion rather than trying not to step on any moderator or fact checkers hot buttons. And that's basically anything that goes, well, against any agenda that they have. So we got an encyclopedia of about 14,000 pages, which all the things you can't say. What you can't say is somewhere around right here. But welcome to the new world, right? Love y'all. Thank you so much for being here. I'll join many of you over at Restricted Republic later, where we're going to go into great detail on things that matter. Till next time, Justus Knight, Godspeed and God bless, signing out.